Let's see. In your opinion, what are the most significant legal case? What's the most significant legal case or trend of 2025 going to be? Like, what are you looking at?
In 2020, it was simple. It was the emergence of the public health state in response to COVID. And I got involved in litigation around the country testing emergency orders. Right now, I think it's the challenge of living in an algorithmic universe and AI. So much of of our world, the boundaries of our social world are determined by hidden formula, as it were, or algorithms that we don't know about or don't know much about. And so I think that as the state acquires more information, defending liberty or zones of significance for people becomes paramount. Let me give you a perfect example. A couple of years ago, I reread the dystopian classics, Aldous Huxley's 1984, George Orwell's, not well, Brave New World, George Orwell's 1984, Fahrenheit 451 by Bradbury, Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, and others. And I was wondering, what makes these tales so popular? And here's what it was. In each case, society had evolved to the point where if you followed the rules, you could have a good life. You'd be secure. You wouldn't have to worry about your future. In each case, the protagonist said that good life isn't good enough for me. What they wanted was a sense of individual significance, the ability to chart their own course. I think that as we move into a world that is dominated more and more by big data, we're willing to sacrifice more of our individual liberty, and we're going to come to a breaking point or a tipping point where people would rather be miserable and free or miserable and making their own decisions than have happiness forced down their throat. And so that's what I view the larger background of more interesting cases to be. What's the example? What electronic searches is a way of determining crimes, or Minority Report. Can you get involved with a predictive algorithm that says, oh, yes, misunderstood. There's a 96% likelihood that she'll rob a bank within the next 3 years. So let's lock her up now. Lock her up now. We know that to be true. And even if it is true, should you be locked up before you commit the crime? So these are things that I worry about in the middle of the night.
Very interesting. I had Mark Garagos on, and I asked him who his most misunderstood client was, and he said Michael Jackson, which I found fascinating. Who would yours be?
And no individual comes to mind. I think I've spent a lot of time representing sex offenders, and I'm not sure we understand what's going on in their world in general. And I think there are libidinal errors that shouldn't result in a lifetime of ostracization. And so I wish we had a better way of determining who is a dangerous sex offender from somebody who just made a mistake. I mean, when I was 15, I may have known a woman who was 19 who introduced me to things that 15-year-olds shouldn't be introduced to as a matter of law. You'll never convince me she was a criminal. I thought she was the fourth person of the Trinity. And so, yet, if she had been caught, she would have been a felon, right? So I would say sex offenders are, in general, widely misunderstood.
Okay, looking back on your career, which case do you think had the most impact on your legacy as a defense attorney? And what do you think people learn from your approach?
I fight every case the same way. Not maybe 25 years ago, the guy who's become my best friend, had lunch with him, and I was doing a couple murders in Middletown, and one, I wasn't killing anybody. I was defending people accused of murder. I did 2 in a row, and it took about 6.5 months to get those done. And about 5 months into the second the series of trials, I said to him, "Man, these cases are killing me. They just won't stop. They won't end." And he looked at me and says, "Well, what do you think they have in common?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "You." And so if I had a legacy, I would want it to be known as a tireless fighter, who will do whatever the law permits, to defend a client. I mean, one of the cases I'm most proud of was a woman in Connecticut who had a 4th of July party. She left the party, had a couple drinks, and on the way home got in a head-on collision. She was seriously injured. 2 of her children were killed in the crash, and a 3rd survived. She was accused of drunken driving and manslaughter and risk of injury to a child. We put the case to trial. My view was even if she had done all those things, she had a child to raise, and no punishment could be worse than being responsible for your own child's death. Well, we won that trial, and she walked away from it. And I got a nice note from one of the jurors years later. You were relentless, you were dogged, and you left no stone unturned. And years later, I ran into the state toxicologist in an airport. And he says, I've never forgotten your cross-examination of me. And I said, good, that's the way it should be.
Oh my gosh. I was just thinking about something in 2024. One of the biggest trials was the Karen Reed trial. And I was about to ask you if you thought she was guilty or innocent and if you agreed with, what happened there at the end. But I stopped myself because I wonder, is that a question that should even be asked of you if you think that they're guilty or innocent? Or is it more like, do you think that that justice was served and they proved their case or didn't prove it well enough? Like, does it matter if you think someone is guilty?
One of the things that's truly unfortunate in the criminal justice system is we've imported moral terminology into evaluating what goes on in the court. I think of guilt as a moral concept. Was Jimmy Carter adulterous? No, but did he lust after women in his heart? Yes. Does that make him guilty of that? Well, I suppose it does, but who cares ultimately? Between his wife, him, God, his parishioners. In the end, whether the state can prove its case is what a jury is what a jury is there to decide. Whether they did the crime or not, I'll be honest with you, Rachel. In the overwhelming majority of cases that I've been involved in, I don't really know what happened. I know that there's reasons to go forward with the case, and there may be enough to convict my client. My job is to create reasonable doubt. In some cases, it's overwhelmingly easy for the state. In some cases, it's not possible. I'm working up a murder case right now, a so-called cold case of a shooting that took place in 2008, looking through warrants that contain things in there that just can't possibly be true. Even they're internally inconsistent. But I've never asked my client, did you shoot the guy? Because I don't particularly care one way or another. I'm not a moralist.
Right. Okay. You are a fascinating guy. We're out of time. But if people want to follow your story, follow your cases, know more about you, how can they learn about you?
I think I have a website. I know I do. And your producer told me that he found it. So there it is.
Normpattis.com if you don't know what it is.
Yeah. And I used to have a podcast of my own. I used to write, I've spent 25 years writing newspaper columns. But I've decided to take a year off right now and ask myself some deeper questions. I'll turn 70 this year and nobody gets out of here alive. And, what's the point of it all? And so I'm spending a lot of time this year just reflecting. So I think, just Google Norm Pattis. Don't believe half of what you hear. If it's good, think it might be true. If it's bad, it can't be true.
All right. Well, good luck with all the things you have going on. I appreciated meeting you. I appreciate how open and honest you are. And I agree with the person who is now working with you. I think that you are much different than what people think. And I love how you opened this whole conversation saying that you were one of the misunderstood when you were younger. And that's why you identify with the people that you represent. So
no question about it. I am saved by grace. And I'm a lucky man. And what I mean by that is just small kindnesses of strangers. But for the kindness of strangers, I don't know what I would have become.
Right. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Be well.